Okay, so this is chapter 37, which is actually going to explain to us how we can change the world. Amazing chapter of Tanya, as any chapter of Tanya. But this chapter is so appropriate for what we're going through now, because here's the thing, I'm sitting in Brazil. Some of you are sitting in someone's sitting in Ukraine, Montreal, New York, wherever you are in the world, Israel, England. And we could think, do our actions really make a difference? Do they really, really affect what's going on? And the answer is yes. And this chapter of Tanya is going to explain to us why. Now, in the previous chapters in Tanya, we learned how specifically the act of a mitzvah causes a dwelling place for Hashem in the lower spheres, right? We have said that Hashem created the world because Hashem wanted the world to be elevated. Nothing should be devoid of godliness. So therefore, he wanted a dwelling place in the lower spheres. What do we call the lower spheres? The lowest world, which is our world, which was created, and the lowest part of this world is our animal soul, which comes from Klippa, albeit Klippa Noiga, yes, we will get to that in a minute, but it comes from Klippa by doing a mitzvah, by partnering with the animal soul and doing a mitzvah. We are able to create a dwelling place for Hashem, unlike the higher, more spiritual worlds. We are able to accomplish a much greater dwelling place for Hashem, where there is more revelation of godliness, and we use our animal souls to actually help achieve this transformation from darkness into light. The higher worlds right now may contain a greater level of revelation of Hashem, whereas in this world now more than ever, we see a great hiding of Hashem's face, a great concealment. However, as a result of us doing our mitzvahs and bringing Hashem into the very, very lowly spheres of our animal soul, we are able to not only elevate this world to a higher level, we are able to actually transform this world, which the higher worlds are not able to do. In other words, the potential in this world is higher than what actually the potential is of the higher worlds and even of the malachim. A human being is able to achieve more than an angel. And in this world, we have the potential to transform darkness into light, which in the higher worlds, that is not a possibility. The little concealment that there is in the higher worlds remain concealed, whereas in this world, we will be able to reveal it. And when will this actually happen in a complete way? When Mashiach comes. And this parak of Tanya tells us the transformation that happens when Mashiach comes, and we are all begging imminently for the revelation of Mashiach. We need it now. We need Mashiach to come now. Ad kan, ad masai, enough. It's a chilul Hashem what's going on. It's not for the benefit of Hashem. We need Mashiach to come right now. It is dependent on our actions now in Golus. This is what Tanya tells us in this chapter. It is dependent on our actions in Golus, which is unlike what happened at the revelation of Har Sinai. At the revelation of Har Sinai, Hashem himself came down and revealed himself in a very, very big way, but it was temporary. And as a result now of our actions in these last moments of Golus, doing mitzvahs, bringing Hashem into our lowly parts of ourselves, our animal souls, we are able to bring Mashiach and transform the world, not only temporarily, but permanently. Because when Mashiach comes, it will be permanent, the permanent revelation of Hashem's light. Now, how does this work exactly? This chapter is actually going to show us that not only do we transform ourselves, in other words, when you do a mitzvah, you elevate your animal soul. This chapter is here to tell us how we can transform the world, not only ourselves. How does this work? All mundane objects in this world derive their energy from klipas noiga. We're not talking about holiness. Holy objects and holy mitzvahs derive their energy from kedusha. Forbidden acts and sins, they come from the 3 complete klipos atameus. 3 complete klipos. We don't want to go there. But the rest of the world, the mundane objects with which we use the world to live, they all derive their energy from klipas noiga. And klipas noiga, the nature of klipas noiga, is that it is easily transformable. So if you are going to use the mundane objects in the world for sinning, unfortunately, the klipas noiga gets sucked into the unpure klipa. But when we use this energy called klipas noiga, a neutral klipa, when we use it for a mitzvah, it becomes elevated to kedusha. And the Alter Rebbe gives 3 examples from the animal world, the plant world, or the vegetative world, and the mineral world. We know there are 3 levels. There's the doimim, tzameach, chai, and medaber. So the Alter Rebbe gives examples from doimim, tzameach, and chai in the realm of klipas noiga, which we could use to elevate to kedusha. So the first example he gives us from an animal. Parchment for a sefer Torah, a mezuzah, tefillin, must be made from the skin of kosher animals. Now, the skin of a kosher animal is something neutral, but we take it and we write holy words on it, and thus we elevate it to a level of kedusha. That's one example. The other example the Alter Rebbe gives is using an esrog. An esrog comes from the plant kingdom. It grows. When we use an esrog, we are obligated to use an esrog from a fruit that is not arla. It has to be permitted. It should not come from the prohibited species. Prohibited species are fruits that are within 3 years of the tree being planted. So that would be coming from the 3 impure klippos. But once 3 years have passed and we use the esrog from this tree, it is not arla, it is elevated to a status of kedusha. And the third example that Alter Rebbe gives is tzedakah given from money which is not stolen. In other words, tzedakah that is given from money which is stolen derives its energy from impure, unclean areas. But tzedakah, which is given from money which is not stolen, that is elevated to the level of kedusha. And later on in this chapter, we will explain how amazingly special the mitzvah of tzedakah is, more so than other mitzvahs. So when we use this world and the objects within the world for mitzvahs, the life in them, the life force in them, rises to kedusha, rises to the level of no concealment of Hashem. Because let us remind ourselves that when we do a mitzvah, we are fulfilling the will of Hashem purely, without any dilutions or concealment. A mitzvah did not go through tzimtzum. A mitzvah is pure will of Hashem, the level of godliness without concealment. And the object, the parchment, the esrog, the money, then becomes a dwelling place for Hashem, in addition to our animal souls, which also become a dwelling place for Hashem. We are also affecting the objects which we use to perform the mitzvah. Now, interestingly enough, these are objects that we're talking about. But regarding elevating the animal soul, even mitzvahs which involve speech, there are mitzvahs that involve only speech. They don't involve objects like learning Torah and davening. They also enable the animal soul to be elevated. At that point, you don't necessarily only need an object. But it is important, though, to learn and daven using your lips, mouthing the words, saying the words, because although the godly soul has intellect, and when we learn Torah, we are using both our animal and our godly soul's intellect to learn Torah, the divine soul cannot express itself by speech. It's the animal soul which speaks. And the amazing concept when it comes to this is that the more energy one puts into saying the words of Torah and Tefillah, the more of your animal soul you are investing into Kedusha. So you can mumble a bracha, or you can mumble your davening, or you could say the words clearly. You could say them with energy. You know how the kids say the psukim at a rally? And I remember when I was a kid, I don't know if Panina remembers, but I said a pasuk at a rally. Actually, I think Panina was one of the girls that encouraged me to have the courage to do that. What did the kids do, especially in front of the Rebbe? They put all their energy, Torah, into saying those words, because the more energy you invest into saying the words of Torah, the more of your animal soul you are investing into Kedusha, which is why we say in the tefillah of Nishmas Kol Chai, which we say in Shabbos, we say, Kol atzmoisai torimarna. All our bones will speak to Hashem. This is actually a source for why we shuckle and sway when we daven and learn, because we're using our entire body to learn and say the words of Torah. So how do the words of Torah and davening spread throughout the body? Through the energy invested. And interestingly enough, Tanya also tells us that the more energy you put in, it's a skula for forgetfulness. In other words, the more energy you invest into saying the words of davening and Torah, the less you will forget. Okay, so in summary, when one does a mitzvah, the object, the body, the energy of the animal soul all become a vehicle for Hashem at the time that you're doing the mitzvah, right? We are not like the Avos who are completely vehicles for Hashem. We sometimes lapse in that, right? We are not tzaddikim. But there are even things, now let's go a step further, there are even things which are not transformed at the time that you use them for godliness, but can be used later for godliness. What is that? Something as simple as food. The energy you derive from the food you eat can later be used to study Torah, to perform mitzvahs. And that's how we actually elevate the food that we eat with the right intentions. Now, this is all transforming klipas noiga into kedusha by using them l'man Hashem and for doing mitzvahs. What about avoiding sinning? Here's something interesting. When you avoid a sin, now a sin, the source of that sin, the life force of the sin, comes from the three impure klippas, comes from impurity, right? We cannot transform the three impure klippas. We could just get rid of it. We could remove it, right? When Mashiach comes, what do we know? V'ruach hatuma avir min haaretz. Hashem is going to remove the spirit of impurity from the world, not transform it. Chuck it out. It's out. Therefore, for example, when a person eats non-kosher food, but yet uses that energy to do a mitzvah, the mitzvah remains a mitzvah, but the energy remains unholy. It's not transformed, obviously, until the person does tshuva. If the person does tshuva, that's a different story. But when Mashiach comes, there will be no need for the stuma. Hashem will remove it completely. Now, why? How does the tuma get removed? What's the logical sequence of how it gets removed? So, in actual fact, something very interesting. We have kedusha, we have klipas noiga, and total klippa, right? Klipas noiga is a little bit of an intermediary between holiness and impurity, unholiness. Unholiness gets its vitality from sparks of holiness, but it uses the klipas noiga as an intermediary. So it kind of convinces you to, sleep a little longer, to eat something maybe not l'shem shamayim, not so healthy for you, to use mundane objects not for kedusha, and thus it brings into itself more nourishment. However, when we make the effort to use everything l'man Hashem in our lives, b'chol drochecha do'ehu, when we use each and every object in our existence for serving Hashem, the three klippas are going to disappear, because the klippas noiga is now elevated to a place of kedusha and cannot help the three klippas which are waiting for their sustenance, because it's being absorbed into the realm of holiness, of kedusha. And this is what's going to happen when Mashiach comes. When Mashiach comes, everything is going to be elevated. The whole world with everything in it is going to be elevated to a state of kedusha, and therefore klippa will simply disappear. And this depends on us doing mitzvahs now, in these last moments, drawing down Hashem's light into our animal soul and to the objects of the world. This is what this chapter of Tanya tells us. Each soul that comes down into this world is responsible to elevate 1/600,000th part of the world. Now, these there are root souls. There are 600,000 root souls, right? Which then subdivide various times. Whatever root soul you belong to, you are responsible. Your soul, your neshama, is responsible not for elevating the entire world, but for elevating 1/600,000th of the world. So therefore, when you do all your activities l'shem shamayim, not only mitzvahs, this chapter is not only talking about mitzvahs, it's about using the world to do mitzvahs, using the physical objects to do mitzvahs, using your will, pushing aside your will of your animal soul and making your animal soul cooperate and be a partner in doing mitzvahs. You are doing your part to elevate the world. Now, what's very, very interesting is that when we use an object, the object sometimes has a chain, and that chain, the entire chain gets elevated. So what do I mean by a chain? So for example, let's say you're going to do a mitzvah and it's cold, you need a coat. So you put on your coat. The farmer in New Zealand who sold the wool to a factory in Korea, who then, I don't know, processes the wool and sells it to China, who then has a wholesaler in Manhattan, who then takes the wool and makes a coat and sells it, everything in that chain becomes elevated. It's an amazing concept. We can use this world for kedusha. The neshama comes down into this world with a great yerida in order to elevate the animal soul and the world. And there is one mitzvah, and I said in the beginning that we were going to get to it, there is one mitzvah which achieves a very, very high level of transformation of klippas noiga, the klippas noiga energy, and that is tzedakah. And why is it? Because tzedakah is money which you used all your energy to work for. Either that, or if you're not working for that money, you somehow have that money for another reason. Maybe your husband works, maybe you had an inheritance, or whatever reason you have that money. Either you put in all your energy to make the money, or even if you don't work, you could have spent that money on the needs of your animal soul. And the animal soul has lots of needs and desires, but you decided to spend that money for tzedakah. By giving tzedakah, you're giving your life away to Hashem, which is why we say tzedakah mekareves es haga'ula. It's like a power source for transforming klippas noiga and therefore preparing the world to be a dwelling place for Hashem. And I will mention that whereas we cannot do much in the realm of fighting this war, we definitely can give tzedakah to the various organizations that need our funding. Just to name a few off the top of my head, there's Hatzalah, there's Zaka, there's Chayal. There's a lot of verified organizations, and please make sure to verify them because apparently there's a lot of infiltration and whatever. But when you give tzedakah, you are making this world such a dwelling place for Hashem that you're preparing it for Mashiach. It creates a larger dira b'tachtonim and prepares the world for Geula. Now, what about Torah study? We just spoke about a lot of mitzvahs. What about learning Torah? Now, learning Torah, Tanya speaks various times about how special learning Torah actually is. Learning Torah has something very unique to it. Firstly, it also elevates the animal soul because of the energy that you put into it. But when we say that Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, the study of Torah is like doing all the mitzvahs, it's because learning Torah is actually more than a mitzvah. Learning Torah is like calling Hashem by his name. Titles are used like as an honor or a compliment, like you would say someone is a chacham or a gibber, someone brave. But when you call a person by their given name, you are appealing to the essence. The name is the essence of a person. There's a story of the Tzemach Tzedek and the Alter Rebbe. The Tzemach Tzedek was the grandson of the Alter Rebbe. When he was a small child, and the Alter Rebbe was caring for him, he was playing with the Alter Rebbe's beard, and he kept on saying, Zayda, Zayda. And the Alter Rebbe said, this is not Zayda, this is Zayda's beard. And then he was playing with the Alter Rebbe's jacket, and he kept on saying, Zayda, Zayda. And the Alter Rebbe said, this is not Zayda, this is Zayda's jacket. And then the Tzemach Tzedek, a small child, got off the Alter Rebbe's lap and went to play. And the Alter Rebbe continued to learn. And then the Tzemach Tzedek went behind him, and he said, Zayda. And the Alter Rebbe turned around, and the Tzemach Tzedek said, this is Zayda. He called him, and he responded. That's why when we learn Torah, even when we read Torah in Shul and Shabbos, we call it Kaira b'Torah. We read the Torah, but Kaira also can mean calling. We're calling Hashem's name. And yet, although learning Torah is on an extremely high level of intimacy with Hashem, despite all this, we are told, that the main thing is not the learning, but the action. The purpose of being in this world is for the purpose of doing, which is why, actually, we interrupt Torah learning to do a mitzvah which cannot be delegated. If there is a mitzvah that you have to do and you cannot delegate it to others to do, you are required to interrupt your Torah learning. A Beinani cannot, or a potential Beinani, cannot change the essence of his animal soul. We are not tzaddikim, and that is not our avodah. But we can change the world. We can make space in this world for Hashem. It's for Hashem that we do this mitzvah, transforming darkness into light, bringing the revelation of Mashiach where everyone will see this level of godliness. Now, there are two schools of thought, and actually one piggybacks on the other a little bit. One school of thought is that Hashem created the world for us. Torah and mitzvahs is for us. They refine the person. Hashem doesn't need the world. We need a world in which we can accomplish growth and attain greatness. That's one school of thought. And in this school of thought, the kavana behind the mitzvah would be greater than the mitzvah itself. Because if it's for you, then you have to be a refined person. But the second school of thought, which is what the Alter Rebbe teaches us, is that the world was created for Hashem. And the neshama comes down to this world to fulfill the purpose of creation, to do Torah and mitzvahs, and to fulfill Hashem's will. And the fact that a person benefits and becomes a refined person is actually the reward for doing a mitzvah. And therefore we say, and therefore the Alter Rebbe ends off this parak of Tanya saying, Hamaisa hu ha'ikar. The action is the main thing. 1 hour of Torah and Maisim Tovim in this world is much greater than the reward in Olam Haba because it fulfills the will of Hashem. So when we learn Torah, we form an intimate connection with Hashem, which should bring us to a level of awe and reverence and yira shamayim, which should cause the person to do more mitzvahs. So yes, Torah learning is very high, maybe higher than a mitzvah. But the goal, the objective is to do more and more mitzvahs. So I found that this chapter is amazingly appropriate for the matzav in which we find ourselves. Because not only can we do mitzvahs, we can encourage others to do mitzvahs. And every mitzvah prepares the world for Geula and brings the world closer. Don't think that your little action isn't worth anything. The Rambam tells us that we don't know which mitzvah will be the one to tip the scale. When we fulfill a mitzvah, we get rid of impure forces. We elevate Klippa and we make the world ready for Mashiach, which should come today, now. Take it from Yad Mamash. Okay.